Thank you all for joining us today for the Richmond 300 Code Refresh Advisory Council meeting. We are going to start with a roll call to confirm that we have a quorum in the room. So Benny Gates.
Here.
Wayne Friedel. Philip Hart.
Here.
Donna James. Dave Johannes.
Yep.
Preston Lloyd.
Here.
Jennifer Mullen.
Here.
Kendra Norrell. Casey Overton. Michelle Parrish. Maritza Peachin.
Yes.
Here. Councilwoman Robertson.
Here.
Brian White.
Here.
Charlie Wilson.
Here.
Roger York. Great. Okay, we have a quorum. So we'll go ahead and get the meeting officially started. Just as a reminder that the Advisory Council is a subcommittee of the City Planning Commission. You're charged with advising the Planning Commission, the Department of Planning and Development Review, and the consultant team in the zoning ordinance revision process. The public will have an opportunity to speak during the public comment period later on in the meeting. We do have online listeners, so it's sometimes difficult for them to hear the conversation of the council and understand who's speaking. So I just ask that you speak loudly and state your name when you're beginning to talk so they know who you're hearing from. So the next item of business is to approve the March meeting notes. Did everyone have a chance to read through the meeting notes? Anyone have any comments, questions, corrections? Okay, we have a motion.
Moved. Second.
Second. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so that brings us to the public comment period. This is the time for the public to comment on items that are not on the agenda. So we will start with those that are in the room first. If you could come forward and provide your name, this is the opportunity for you to offer comment. You come forward.
Am I right here?
Sure. Just pretend there's
I was hoping you were going to give me a podium to hide behind, but that's okay.
You don't need to-
Okay, well, that's good. My name is Bo Farrelham. I'm an architect and I live at 4210 King Crest Parkway in the city's first district. I've lived in Richmond for over 43 years. In 1982, I moved to the Chimborazo neighborhood of Churchill, where I renovated and preserved the 1903 detached row house, which was my home for 23 years. Our family moved to the King Crest neighborhood in 2005, making a very deliberate decision to stay in the city. I support the vision of Richmond 300 Master Plan and appreciate the dedication and thoughtful devotion of this committee and the planning department to the Code Refresh effort. I've been actively engaged in this process, attending the September 24th presentation at Dogwood Middle School and following the ZAC meetings on Microsoft Teams, attending the open house down at City Hall, and also completing the recent online survey. I've heard people just when they address this committee say, we need more density, or I support duplexes, or one size does not fit all. And I can agree with those statements, all of them. However, I think it's essential that when we make these statements, we consider context of what exists in place today. What we propose should be appropriate to the area, to the neighborhood, to the community or node. Richmond is a city of neighborhoods with distinct character and communities. We can all reel off their names: Ginter Park, Manchester, Churchill, Scott's Addition, Battery Park, Jackson Ward, The Fan, Forest Hills, Bellevue, Newtown, Swansboro. We can just keep going. But anyway, the thought is that we are a community of neighborhoods, and that's important to our identity. Zoning regulations are complex and critically important issues, and ones which are defined by terms and parameters that are unfamiliar to most citizens and are not part of our everyday understanding. At the March Zoning Advisory Committee meeting, the planning department reported that just over 100 people showed up for the 3 open houses that were used to present and gather feedback for the the new zoning districts, the proposed zoning districts. That attendance was characterized as pretty good. But we're a city of approximately 230,000 people. So those 100 attendees equate to less than 0.5%. So I say we need to do better. Information should be readily available and presented in a manner that is understandable to Richmond citizens. I received many comments from my neighbors about the complexity and lack of clarity in the recent survey. I think in addition to a link on the planning department's webpage, we need to reach the people where they are, at schools, grocery stores, libraries, places of faith. We need input. We need thoughtful civil discourse. We need buy-in. So I ask you, when you consider these issues, when you look at residential zoning districts and how we're going to define lots within them by size, width, number of dwellings, attached, detached, mixed use, duplexes, ADUs, that we give careful consideration to that, okay? What we do with code refresh should strengthen our neighborhoods and communities, respect their fabric, and allow them to thrive. And let me close by reminding us all of a statement from the Richmond 300 Master Plan, which says, good urban design doesn't solve everything, but bad urban design doesn't solve anything. So thank you for letting me share my thoughts.
Others that would like to offer comments at this time? Do you have anybody online?
Get one person. One person.
Did you already?
I did.
Okay.
You have the ability to be.
Hello? Sorry, I can barely hear y'all. Can I talk? I'm talking. Cool. Hello. Hi, I'm Brock. I used to come to this stuff all the time, but then became a hermit and pretty stoked that I'm actually getting out sort of and doing things. I live in the 6th district, been in Richmond on and off for quite a while.
Sir,
I'm reading.
Can you tell us your last name, please?
Oh, Hall, Hall, like a hallway. That's me.
Go ahead, sir. You can offer your comment. Thank you.
Sure. I'm just reading through this presentation. So there are a few things that jumped out at me. One is I lived in the fan for a while and chronic park.
Sir, this is time for comment on items that are not on the agenda.
Oh, my mistake. Well, I guess I have two other things then. So one is 3-story or 3-bedroom apartments is something I've been thinking about because they're good for families. And so encouraging their construction near schools and stuff would probably be a good idea. And, walkability and stuff like that. And it's convenient, you attract families, people like it. Yeah, I guess, let me look at my notes. I may have had one other thing. Nope. Cool. Awesome. Well, I guess I'll talk later about that other stuff. Maybe. I don't know how that works. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anybody else online? Okay. Sir, you're welcome to come forward.
Hi, everybody. My name is Christopher Shepherd. I'm a grad student at VCU right now and working on my master's in social work on the administrative policy practice side. So that's kind of going to be where my focus is going to be. And similar related to the idea of community input, I'm no expert. I'm not in real estate. I'm not an investor. I'm not in city planning or anything. So I'm trying to learn the process as I go. But trying to just understand what kind of input has been there, including I'm just now, this is my first time I've been able to come to one of these meetings, trying to understand how the process works. But one thing is I did include the Office of Sustainability had a meeting a while back, a community meeting that was focused on environmental justice. And I'm just kind of curious, this is a question more comment of how research and evidence like that is being incorporated to the city, the code refresh, the city's future planning process. I don't know if this would be an opportunity for a question, but that's where I'm curious about.
Okay, Marianne, you have a
All I was gonna mention is, so as a part of the, later on, we're gonna have an update on our working group. Working groups are gonna look at the code refresh process through several different lenses. One is the environment. That's the opportunity where we're gonna look at all these different policies and all these practices that we've adopted as a city and see how, whether the work that we're doing here complies with that. So we're definitely taking that into consideration. And you're welcome, the survey is still online if you want to join.
Sounds good. I have requested, haven't heard back, so that's why I came to kind of.
Thank you, sir. Is there anybody else that'd like to offer comment? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to the next agenda item, which is a council recap and meeting introduction, and we'll turn that over to Marion Pitts.
Marion Pitts with the planning department. At the last meeting, we talked about some of the assumptions that the consultants are looking at as they are working on the zoning map related to our major streets, related to transitions between the higher density and lower density parts of the city, and also how we treat our audit-oriented corridors. Today, we are going to continue that conversation in a large group format. It was a lot of material presented to the ZAC at one point in time. So since you've had a chance to sit on it and look at it some more, we're going to have a large group discussion on that. After that, we're going to have a presentation on the use information. You have a packet there with those uses. I have additional copies for members of the public. I just have to switch out one page and get you those, and it's also online right now. The format and kind of how we're going to go about going forward is to present you with information at the end of the meeting and then have that discussion at the following meeting, so you have time to actually read it. We thought that would be better use of your time. And then, as was mentioned, we had a survey and that closed on 3/31 with over 1,000 responses. So we're taking that information and cleaning up some of the responses weren't complete. So we'll have that information provided to you. And as mentioned, the survey was really long and a little difficult to complete. So as we go forward, we asked our consultant team to really think about how the online engagement is something that's easy to engage with. This time it was more, we just pulled it over into a survey and it was a little difficult. Acknowledging that and working on that.
Any members of the advisory council have questions for Marion? We'll let you roll right into the next agenda item, which is an update on the working groups.
So we've had out for a couple of weeks our in public interest forum for the working groups. And as of today, we have 102 people interested in participating. Kevin and I were talking that I didn't limit people to choose just one, but we may ask people to choose just one. So the working groups, everyone will have a chance to talk and participate in that. Those working groups, it's open until the 13th, 4/13 on the CoRe website. So members of the public, if you haven't applied, not applied, anyone's invited to join. If you want to express your interest, that's still online until that time. We have co-leaders, members of the Zoning Advisory Committee who volunteered in a previous survey to be leaders, and I've reached out to them, and also members of the city departments that are we're going to work to meet next week and talk about that first meeting and the agenda for that meeting going forward. The only hiccup is we're missing a co-leader from the advisory council for the transportation working group. So if anybody is interested in co-leading, the staff will be working with you on the agenda. You'll have Dirona, who is the head of our Office of Equitable Transit and Mobility, will be your co-lead. So it wouldn't be a lot of, thank you, Ms. Mullen. Yeah, I'll reach out to you about next week, sitting down and talking with Dirona on board.
Didn't want to have to volunteer some.
I was thinking, I always like to play engineers.
And if you're interested, so Casey's going to be our co-lead for our housing, Maritza for diverse economy, Jennifer for transportation, Dave for high quality places, and Damien for the environment.
Does anyone have any questions about the work group process for Mary Ann? Well, I realize we're breaking into working groups so you can have more technical conversations, but if you're not a co-lead, but you still want to listen in, or advisory council members.
I'll send out all the advisory council members will be invited to all the different.
Well, if there are no other questions for staff at this time, we will go to the next agenda item, which is going to be Renee Beaverstein, our consultant, who is going to go over the draft districts and mapping text. Renee, are you ready? We can't hear you. We need to unmute you. Marianne, can you unmute Renee, please?
You should be able to unmute.
Can you hear us? Okay, he can't unmute himself. Well, Livery? Bear with us for just a second, Renee. We're going to take a look.
And can you unmute yourself now? Colin, can you unmute yourself?
There was something called allow mic when you hit that the three ellipses.
Colin unmuted before, but now he's.
Can you unmute yourself now?
Renee dropped
Bumped
off.
off?
Renee, Colin or Jonathan, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, it seems like we're able to.
Yeah, I can unmute myself.
Colin, can you present the information?
I can try. Let me see.
For those that are joining us online, just hang tight for a moment. We're having some technical difficulties getting our consultants ready to present, so just hang tight.
Renee, can you unmute now?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes? All right, excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, I apologize. I think I was trying to, I don't know why it didn't work this time. I was doing the same thing I did before, but I'm using a different app now. Give me a sec. Let me try to share. Sorry, it's going to make me quit and reopen. Give me a sec.
This is when we need some good technology jokes in our back pocket.
Won't let me share. For some reason.
Marianne, are you able to pull up your presentation? Renee, we're going to see if Marianne can pull up your presentation and then we'll just have her advance your slides. Hey, Renee, can you see that? Who's Renee?
It looks like Renee had to quit and re-sign on. Brian, can you approve his permissions when he rejoins?
Okay, guys, can you hear me now?
You can.
Okay,
Can you see
okay,
the presentation?
I can see it. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Okay, great. Looks like I actually probably could share now, but let's go with this for the moment. Sorry, I apologize. Something weird happened. I don't know what. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today, I think, as Marianne said before, last time you had a whole lot of stuff thrown at you and felt like we didn't have enough time to discuss it. So we're really going to use most of this meeting to follow up on some of those same topics that we covered last time, and just make sure everybody really feels like they've had a full chance to make their voices heard and ask any questions that you might have. And then we're going to complete this meeting today with a presentation about how you can read the uses of the draft uses that you've been given. So you should have a package in front of you of the draft uses for the districts. We'll take you through just how to read that, and we'll give you a few questions to think about. And then we'll circle back to that topic next meeting in May. And we'll do the same thing again after that. So by the end of next meeting, the intention is we'll have all the mapping done in draft. We can give that to you, and you'll have a month to chew on it and think it over, and then we'll have detailed discussion on that in June. So maybe before we go through all the details of last time again, and just wanted to maybe just open the floor quickly and see if there's any really burning questions or things people want to talk about from last time that you didn't feel like were covered. Just want to put that out to you first of all, and then we can go through question by question, and we've got a few follow-up questions as well. Anything, just throwing it out there to anybody, any things you feel like were missed or that you really want to talk about?
Hey, Renee, I've got one.
Yeah.
So I really want to ask a hypothetical, which I think will illustrate will confirm my understanding of how these, the upzoning in the residential areas will work. So this is a hypothetical. We've got a house that's currently in R1, okay, or a lot that's currently in R1. I'm looking at your page 9. So the lot width is 100 feet. Not that big, keep going. That one, yeah. Lot width is 100 feet. So if that area is upzoned 2 steps to RDC, which is depicted in areas and the maps that are also part of this, that lot could be could be split into 4 lots, 25 feet wide. Each lot could have a duplex on it. All right, 4 times 2 is 8. And each one of those 4 lots could have an ADU. 8 plus 4 is 12. So we've gone from a lot that is currently occupied by one family unit, and with the ADUs, it's now 12. Is that right?
The answer is yes, but asterisk, for discussion. So this is why we're asking you this question right now.
Okay.
So basically yes, that's probably the biggest possible upzoning you could have. And I acknowledge it's a big change. So I think we wanted to put this in front of you and be like, do you really agree with this or not? And if not, what do you think the approach should be? So that's one thing that I want to talk about today in a bit more detail.
All right.
Yeah.
There was just confusion. I mean, it's really great, actually, that we've had time to go through this and we're talking about it today. This is exactly what we needed. But there was some confusion about 2 units and 2 buildings and how the arithmetic really works. But that clarifies it, at least for me. Thank you.
Yeah. So so we'll show you some images as well before this, which will kind of speak to some of that as well. Any other questions, comments, big picture? Hopefully sir, go ahead.
I'll follow up to that, but it can wait
Charlie,
until we get to that
if you
point.
could just remember to announce your name, so that those online
Yeah.
can know who's talking. Thank you.
Charlie Wilson, I have a follow-up to that, but I can wait until we get to the slide.
Okay. Anybody else? Sorry, I can't really see you very well, so you need to speak up if you want to talk. Or nod very vigorously. And seem like a little tiny thumbnail of the room. If not, let's go back, Jonathan, to the beginning of the presentation, and we'll start with the first couple questions. So next slide. So we kind of raised these 2 questions with you before about, first of all, about eliminating lot area as a metric and just using lot width. So we put together a few illustrations here, and we discussed this last time. I think we basically heard from you, let's test it out some more and come back with some more information, and we can discuss it further. So that's what we're hoping to do today. And then the second point up at the front here is about duplexes versus multiple buildings on these detached zone lots. So first question here. Oh, sorry. Jonathan just told me that Marianne is controlling the presentation. So thank you, Marianne. First question here, limiting lot area and going with lot width as a metric. We showed the kind of simpler diagram, thought I'd sort of try doing a little massing test here, and just wanted to put this out in front of you and sort of get your reaction to this. So one of the kind of main implications of doing that is what happens when you've got a corner lot. So your corner lot has frontages on 2 different streets. And so if you measure only by lot width, you can, effectively cut your lot into half or to thirds, maybe even more than that. So I did 2 tests here. The one on the left is for RDA. That's the, your largest detached zone. And then the one on the right, RDC, that's your smallest detached zone. We didn't do RDB, but it'll sort of be between these 2. And so if the minimum lot width for RDA is 90 feet, you're on a corner here, you could, where you see that gray house on the left-hand side, that's sort of a typical existing condition. You might have another one of those in the lot next door. If you're on a corner, you could split that in half. You'd still have 90 foot frontage on both streets. And so question was to you guys, how do you feel about that? The intention of using width is more about sort of trying to maintain the kind of street feel or character. And so, as you kind of walk down the street, the rhythm should sort of look similar. The one on the right-hand side is maybe a little bit more extreme because you're talking about much smaller lots here down in RDC. And so if you were to essentially take an existing house there, you could subdivide the rear parts of your property and get, a couple more units on there. It almost would be like creating an ADU, but then separating it off onto a separate lot by itself. Now you'll say, theoretically for each one of those lots, you could have up to 2 units plus an ADU. Probably realistically, in this scenario that you're seeing right now, you wouldn't be able to squeeze that many in. So this is just a one possible test of what would come out of that. And so we just wanted to kind of get your reaction to this approach. If you think this is wild and going to ruin the character of these areas, let us know. Or if you think that it's it's appropriate, it's an appropriate way to add density, let us know as well. So I just wanted to kind of get your reaction to this first of all before we moved on.
I think pending,
Right.
Charlie Wilson. I think pending, it makes sense, and it's a relatively non-intrusive way of introducing density, particularly if a main dwelling already exists at the corner frontage.
Yeah, I think in terms of this, it's not unreasonable in certain places, and other places it might be less reasonable. Oh, Dave Johannes speaking. So, I would have to really understand the district that we're talking about, the scale of the housing relative to the scale of, we can figure out what the scale of the new housing would be to just get a sense of going, let's say, from an RDA to an RDC scenario at the same spot would be potentially in some areas a little extreme, I think. But in other areas, it would be a great way to go to be able to populate the area. So I would think that smaller scale neighborhoods could handle more division than much larger scale massing neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just would say that at the moment we're just talking about that issue about removing lot area and using lot width as the metric, not necessarily the upzoning from RDA to RDC. That's a bit of a separate conversation for later. But
okay, so I have no problem with it as long as it meets a scenario that fits within the district. And I could go either direction in terms of lot width and lot length.
Other reactions to this?
Yeah, Philip Hart again. My big thing is sort of feel and function of preserving that of residential neighborhoods, and this seems to work to me, if I'm understanding it correctly. I'm not a planning developer or anything, but it seems like you're keeping the same structure as it faces the street, but you're really just shortening, in this case, this example, the backyard. So as you're going down the street, feels the way, functions the way, there is still yard around the structure, but you're putting density in and preserving the functionality in the field. So it seems to make sense to me.
Any other comments?
This is Wayne Cradle. I would be curious about, I see that it has limited parking here. I would be curious if there's more houses in that spot. It, in some ways, looks congested. I will be concerned as to look and feel in the sense of people actually going into these homes, parking, maybe not having the backyard space, etc. So I agree. I think in some scenarios it would work. I'm curious if it's applied to every single scenario, how that could be an issue.
Yeah, I would say on the parking issue, so you don't have parking requirements anymore. We're at least in the moment not planning to bring them back. So I would say looking at these two, now the market's still going to, demand a certain amount of parking. The scenario on the left for RDA, there's tons of room for parking there. That's not an issue at all. For RDC, because it's such a small lot, yeah, it's pretty congested. So of those two different options that we're showing you there, the one on the left, the left side of RDC, the one in the middle of the screen, is basically showing one parking spot for all those lots. The one on the lower right-hand side is if you had a slightly wider lot in the corner and you had an alley behind, there might be room to, put a garage back behind these two new buildings that you're constructing and have some sort of access to it. So that wouldn't be required again because we don't have parking requirements. But we understand it's maybe difficult to sell a unit in Richmond without any parking on site. So I was just sort of thinking about what sort of space you'd need to make it work. In terms of backyards, I'd like to maybe hear more about your thoughts about that. There is there's a rear setback requirement and there's a coverage requirement. But if you feel like there needs to be more green space, is that what you're thinking about?
Yes, I think when I think about the value of a home, it's not just the home itself, but what's around it. And so people being able to, in some ways, have some sort of green space, I think would be important. And I get that the idea is to create more units for more people. But I think if the value of living is only just the building itself and not what's around it, I do wonder, long term, what does that mean for the quality of those who will live there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, understood.
Charlie Wilson, I'll add something really quick about the parking. I've actually done myself parking studies for developments where it was exactly this configuration. And what you find is a lot of people, like looking at this example, a lot of people in the neighborhood, whatever neighborhood it happens to be, typically would be parking along Key Street. But if you go through like, Churchill North or other parts of the city that are redeveloping, the S Street has almost nobody parking on it. And if the people who live in these two rear houses are using on-street parking on the S Street, I've observed in the field generally like a lack of an issue there. Just saying with the scientific approach, at least in the cases I've looked at, it doesn't generate a apocalyptic scenario.
Yeah, and you think that somebody would be willing to buy a house like that without parking or rent a house?
Yeah, I mean it's working. I can provide a list.
This is Brian White. I would also point out that neighborhood that has some of the tightest yards and tightest parking situations is the Fan, where you've got houses that are going for $1.5 million left and right. So that when it's done well, those things don't seem to be an impediment. People want to be there.
This is Elizabeth Greenfield. I would agree with Brian. In my neighborhood, very tight on-street parking and smaller homes that almost everyone is putting an addition on, and very few people actually have backyards. So I think it's truly a consumer preference of whether or not they want the bigger home versus a yard. So I hear what you're saying, Mr. Creedle, and I hear what you're talking about parking, but I think every consumer wants something different. Sometimes they're going to choose a house covering the whole lot because they want more house than they value, green space.
And my neighborhood in Northside, we have green space. Maritza, Peach Inn, in my neighborhood in Northside, we have like kind of slightly larger lots. I mean, I don't think we would end up being an RDC in this scenario. It'd probably be like RDB or something. So I think like the cool thing about Richmond is that there's lots of different types of neighborhoods. And as we look at these, it's not necessarily that like everything in Richmond is going to become, RDC, but because that would not make sense. At least that's my approach.
Also looking at the future, if I look at an RDC neighborhood where you're looking at a lot width of 25 feet, if I'm reading things right. That would be a much more dense neighborhood, and the more dense neighborhoods are going to be much more walkable. And 40 years from now, as those neighborhoods become more and more dense and start to infill this, more opportunity for transit to be able to manage to take care of people in higher density areas. And thus, the idea of parking right now is not something that concerns me. I see us trying to head more towards a non-totally auto-oriented environment and into a more walkable and transit-oriented environment. And the RDC neighborhoods would be places that I would think we would be heading towards doing that.
Okay. Any other comments, or can I move on to the next? I think that's all good feedback to hear. So for the next question here was the other discussion about, so if we allow 2 units plus an ADU on these RD districts, what happens if you put them in one building versus separate buildings? You know, should they be forced to be connected like a duplex, or could they be separate? So I just wanted to kind of throw a few different images out in front of you and get your reaction. So again, sort of the buildings you see on the left and the right of each one of these scenarios are, you know, typical buildings in like an RDA type scenario. So these are large lots, you know, 90 feet wide at least. So let's say there's a house out front. They currently have a permission for an ADU at the back already. So showing that. The one in the middle is a bit of a test. So let's say we're allowing up to 2 units plus an ADU. One on the left is the horizontal duplex with 2 buildings attached to each other, a semi-detached kind of style. And then on the right-hand side, the vertical duplex with a unit on top and a unit below. So those are 2 possible ways that could be arranged. If you move to the next slide. Other possibilities are side by side. So the sort of the most extreme, and again, not sure if how you'll react to this, but the one on the left-hand side, if you were to just line everything up along the street, you could have, you know, 2 separate houses plus an ADU. I know you've got rules around where you put ADUs today, but let's say those went away or things changed. The most extreme thing would be like 2 units and an ADU all along the street. The other possibility would be allowing, you know, detached buildings, but one sits behind the other. So you've got one building up front, and then you've got another building and an ADU in the back. And so just putting all these out in front of you, any reactions to these? Do they all seem okay, or do some of them seem terrible? Thoughts?
No, somebody has thoughts. This is Elizabeth Greenfield. I have a personal preference.
Yeah.
That the horizontal and vertical duplexes just look better in more residential area. But, you know, we are looking at more ways for density and different configurations. This provides options. But I think.
So sorry, you're saying you prefer the duplex than to have separate buildings?
The horizontal and vertical duplex. I think it's going to look more fitting to what's already in the neighborhood. And if that's going to be a concern of folks in existing neighborhoods, how the new developments can blend. That's just a personal opinion of mine.
This is Marisa Peachin. How does accessory dwelling unit kind of get defined in this scenario? Because like, could it just be one building with 3 units?
It could be. Sorry, just got a comment from Colin. Brian, can you unmute Colin? I think he wants to say something. Maybe I missed something here. The way it's defined is, I think we're currently saying up to 1,000 feet. At least that's what we have in our draft right now, which is more than what you currently have. Oh, hello. So it's limited in size. But yes, it could be in one building. You could have one building with 3 units in it. So if you think about the scenarios on the previous slide with the duplexes, you could have a duplex and a like basement unit or something that would be your ADU.
Colin should be able to unmute.
All I was going to suggest is if you are allowed to build another unit that's detached on the lot, you're more likely to keep the existing structure, because you're probably unlikely to add another unit attached to your existing structure. So if you can do another unit, in your backyard, you could add the duplex in your backyard and leave the existing structure alone.
Right. So if in the right-hand scenario here, if that yellow building up front was existing, you could add another house in the back plus an ADU.
Charlie Wilson. I'm wondering if someone were, if that feels weird to somebody, it might feel weird if it's a scenario where it's entirely new construction, like all 3 buildings. Maybe this could be an opportunity for a supplemental regulation that says if a main building exists that's of a certain age or configuration, et cetera, you can, instead of, to prevent a demolition and new construction of something, you could decide to, or be able to, with the supplemental regulation, have that extra unit in the rear. I don't know if this is something we're doing or not doing, but just throwing it out there as maybe something that could qualify that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I think in the Charlottesville code that we worked on, we allowed a sort of bonus for people who preserved existing houses and added more to the property as opposed to tearing down.
Also,
Sorry, go ahead.
I'll just pipe in, this is Johannes. And if I just look at these 4 scenarios, scenario on page 5, I'm fine with both of them. No problems with adding, having a attached duplex. I have no problems with the larger scale horizontal mapping. No problems with the ADUs in the back. On the page 6, I'm a little concerned on the left scenario where you have the 2 houses and also the ADU. This is purely in the RDA zone, all facing the street, and totally solid on the 4th scenario with the large house facing forward, another large house in the back, and 2 ADUs in the back. So on page 6, concerned with the left side.
Yeah, and so today you actually do have rules around where you can place your ADU. So we may, if that's a concern, we may need to maintain some of those. So you can't build an ADU like in front of your house or something today, even if there is, room in the setback. Sorry, go ahead.
Elizabeth Greenfield, page 6, RDA, on the front and back on the right, are where it's single family in the front and then the rear. Are you assuming alley access for access to the ADU side? Because we're doing that today, but are you assuming alley access for?
No, not necessarily. And for RDA, you probably wouldn't see alleys that often.
That's what I'm thinking. That you wouldn't have
we'll show you RDC after this, and then it may be more of an issue. But for here, yeah, you would drive through from the front to parking. Colin, were you going to say something?
Nope. No alley.
Okay. Other comments?
Yeah, I had a comment. I won't come as a surprise to anyone that I don't think we ought to have duplexes except along major streets, which is what Richmond 300 calls for. That said, I would agree with much of what's been said, particularly most recently Dave Johannes, that the one on the left, side by side, is the least preferable because it completely changes the appearance of the neighborhood for the reasons that Colin said. And I like the conversation about preserving the existing front building. The front and back appeals to me. So those would be my first and last choices. The other 2 sort of fall in the middle. But again, I don't think we ought to have duplexes except along major streets.
Okay, understood. Okay, other comments? Yeah, so I think with a lot of these tests, we're trying to sort of feel out where your limits are. So sort of trying to get a reaction. So don't hate us. We're just testing things out. Next slide, please. So this is now applying that same question to RDC. So now you're getting into much smaller lots. And just wanted to sort of see if your reaction is the same to this or if you react differently to it. So there's not really a possibility of doing, a side-by-side horizontal duplex here because the lots are so narrow. But there's a back-to-back duplex on the left-hand side and then a vertical duplex on the right. So two possibilities if you allow this. Next slide. And then here's some other possibilities if you're building two different units, it's getting, pretty tight. So a front and back plus an ADU behind that on the left-hand side. In the one in the middle, kind of the same, but let's say you have an alley, which is pretty common for RDC. So at least the one on the left-hand side probably has no parking at all. The one in the middle would be able to have parking accessed off the alley. So let's say in this scenario, you've got, a garage and an ADU above the garage. And then on the right-hand side, corner lots. So you're accessing from the side street. It's a bit like the very first scenario that we showed you with dividing up into separate lots, except in this case, you're keeping it all in one lot. But because we're allowing up to 2 units plus an ADU on a single lot, this is what it might look like if there were separate buildings. So the one on the top right-hand side is with no alley. So probably again, no parking, maybe one parking space you could fit in there. And lower right-hand side is with an alley. So you've got a potential for a garage in the back. So when you think about this compared to RDA, do you feel the same way about it, or does it change your mind one way or the other?
Johannes to speak up. When it comes to getting to the tighter neighborhoods, getting down to our 25-foot wide lots from the width side, I'm 100% open to the whole idea of putting as much density in there as possible. If you start thinking about how people would develop them and what would happen, there'd be small little courtyards incorporated. There are pathways to get in through these areas. And, I think we're already starting to develop properties like that in the city of Richmond. And we could start pointing out where people have done that. And we have these little trails for people to wander through their communities and interconnect. And for me, I'd be happy to, go smaller lots also. But for this case, I think there's a lot of opportunity to do some really exciting lifestyle living.
Maritza Peachin, can you remind me what the minimum lot size is for RDC?
It's by width only now, at least. Yeah, so it's 25 feet wide. Now on corner lots, probably mostly going to be wider than that, but the actual minimum that we're proposing right now is 25 feet. And that really kind of captures your smallest or most of your smallest existing lots.
And if you realistically want to get parking back behind these buildings and parking access, the width of the lot is going to have to be something more like 50 or 60 feet. Realistically.
Yeah, or you have an alley.
Jennifer Mullen, just a clarification. So with the scenario on page 8 on the left or in the center where there's not a street or alley access for the middle unit, or just practically speaking, would you mandate in the ordinance that in order to split the lot to allow for those units, would you require access to go along with it so that you're not landlocking the middle unit?
Well, keep in mind that we're not splitting the lot here. So this is for one lot. So this is separate from the question before about if you subdivide a corner lot. This is like an existing lot. We're allowing 2 units plus an ADU right now.
So it has to be single ownership.
Single ownership, that's right. So it would be one person, and it would be like a family member or a renter or something living in the other ones.
I mean,
Conduit?
You could conduit.
Yeah. Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there needs to be access, but I
That's the
don't
only
think it
way
has to
you
be
would
by
have.
vehicle.
Doesn't have to be
Pedestrian
vehicle.
access.
Yeah, so you've got a side setback around these buildings. There's enough room to walk back there.
You can't sell off the middle one except that condo.
But if somebody wanted to do that, they could provide a cross easement for somebody to get back there.
But you couldn't,
Yeah.
unless they allow for it in the code, you can't sell the lot unless you condo it.
Okay.
For the council members,
Yeah.
just, I think the consultants know our names, just remember to speak loudly and announce ourselves for the people that are listening. Sorry to keep bringing that up. Got my instructions.
Any other thoughts about this?
I guess this is Elizabeth Greenfield. I guess any clarity on page 8 where you're saying, you know, these scenarios, it's going to be, are you saying the single family homes will have same ownership? So because you've got it where there's 2 single family homes and then potentially 2 ADUs on the lot. And to Jennifer Mullins' question about access, I heard you say that you're assuming single ownership. If that's the case, does the city, how is that forced?
So when you apply for a building permit, you generally have to have some accessible path to a building.
I'm meaning how is it enforced down the road that if one person owns all that, it's not renting them out or
You might rent it.
Well, you're not allowed to.
No. So you could rent them both out
Yeah.
if you wanted to.
I think Preston Lloyd, our attorney, I think I know the answer to this, but I have a feeling others might be wondering the same thing, and I just want to get it out there for
Yeah, so
comment.
the answer is that you can't create a subdivision unless
Yeah.
it's approved by the city. And so you wouldn't be able to transfer ownership of a single home on that lot unless it's been subdivided. That said, and Jennifer alluded to this, and I'll reiterate, you would be able to create what's known as a horizontal land condominium. Meaning you'd be able to create 3 separately conveyable pieces of this, which would allow for independent ownership of these respective pieces. And there's no way that you would be able to bake into the ordinance a prohibition on being able to do so. You just wouldn't be able to subdivide it and create independent parcels in that manner.
Yep.
Okay, any final comments before we move on? Okay, if not, then let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to take us through the discussion questions that we had last time. We had a bit of follow-up or feedback at the end, but I just want to go back over them and sort of and just hear your kind of full feedback on each one of these. So the first one was about, as was mentioned before, upzoning major streets and residential areas. So question is, how far do we upzone these streets? What's the rationale for doing so? What are the considerations we take into consideration? We put together this chart for you this time just to maybe make it a little bit clearer what we're thinking about. And you saw some of this tested out on maps. So you have on the where it says current zoning, those are your 5 current single attached districts. Proposed new zoning is, generally speaking, what those are going to be transitions into. Won't necessarily always be the case because we got the opportunity to remap the stuff, but as a kind of first pass, that's kind of what we're kind of translating those into. And so in terms of lot widths, there's a slight difference between some of these, probably from R3 to RDB is the biggest deal. So that's 75 feet to 50 feet. For others, it's the same or not that different. And then we're going from 1 unit plus an ADU per lot up to 2 units plus an ADU. So I think all that stuff already. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, where those are within a residential area in the plan and they front on what's designated as a major street in the plan, we have the opportunity to upzone them to something else. And so trying to figure out how far to go. In some cases, maybe we don't upzone. So we wanted to kind of ask you a few follow-up questions about this. In the kind of the first pass that we gave you last time, as just a kind of a rule of thumb, just to kind of put something down, we upzone everything by 2 rungs, basically. So RDA became RDC, or R1 became RDA, which became RDC, and so on down this chart. I guess next slide here.
I think this is, wait,
Sorry, go ahead.
Charlie Wilson, this is the one that Mr. Hart commented on that I wanted to provide maybe some clarification. I don't think that much R1 property would have a major street designation in the first place. And to the extent it does, I mean, I'm just kind of armchair quarterbacking this, so forgive me. But I think it would be like your Cary Street Road of the world, places like that, which even if someone were delusional enough to tear down one of those houses and do something else, I'm not sure there's probably some deed restriction even that would prevent that in that specific case. So
I don't,
I'm not sure.
Maritza Peachin, I'm not sure that I don't know. I'm not sure that you need to upzone on all major streets. We need to look at it very closely. Because I think on some of them that are like major mixed use streets, that might make a lot of sense. But on the residential ones, I think we need to look at it a little bit more closely, and maybe it's only one step when it's a residential, potentially. But I'm not sure it can be like that categorically carte blanche done.
So let's skip ahead 2 slides because I've got a bunch of questions for you. Or sorry, next one. So yes, I guess, broadly, so this is sort of a first pass approach. This wasn't meant to be, the solution to everything. Does this make a sense as sort of a base approach, or do you think that this goes too far or not far enough? And I think, to your point, Marichka, what other contextual factors should be taken into account? So I just want to make a list of, if we're going to do this, sort of what the rule is. Because I want to, basically, when we do this, I want to kind of apply a rule consistently across the city. I don't want to just be like here and there. So
Yeah, I think
thoughts about what would inform it?
Yeah, I had a couple of thoughts. First of all, I don't agree with what you just said about it has to be the same all across the city, because the city is developed in different ways over different periods. They're different neighborhoods. We have a lot of diversity of housing choices, which is a positive thing about Richmond. So I don't think we ought to just uniformly automatically apply everything everywhere.
Just to clarify, I wasn't saying that we're going to do that everywhere. I just meant that to have some set of rules. So let's say it's based on, existing context, that there's some, existing multifamily buildings in the area, proximity to transit, proximity to mixed uses. I just want to have some sort of like rationale for it. So it's not just, I'm just picking things on a map.
Okay, but the real thing I wanted to talk about was the two-step. And if you could go back to slide 9, I want to make a point about this. So it shows under current zoning that we have 5 residential districts, okay? And we are essentially eliminating R1, and then we're resulting in 3 detached districts, okay? So a two-step move is going from what is now, say, R2 to something more dense than even R5, okay? But my point is, when you have 2 steps and you only have 3 categories, that's a huge jump. Whereas if we're preserving, we're not talking about preserving, but 2 steps, if we had 5 categories, wouldn't be that dramatic. So I think if you look at it that way, 2 steps are, in my mind, too much of a move. I like what Maritza said, and this actually comes from Richmond 300 and conversations we had a few years ago, that Richmond 300 wasn't necessarily saying you have to have duplexes, multifamily along major streets. It was saying that's where you can have it. And where it makes sense, to me at least, is to have it where it exists now, expand it, step it down, say 1 step in proximity to current density. And then, honestly, it allays a lot of the concerns that I think people are going to have about what's being proposed. So just think about the 2, maybe it should be 1 step because we only have 3 detached categories.
Yeah, it could also depend on what you were zoned right now. So like we could treat R1 differently than we treat R2, even if they both become, RDA as a base, right? In terms of how we upzone.
Yeah.
Just thinking. I'm just, again, just trying to come up with a rationale that we can apply.
Charlie Wilson here. Yeah, I totally understand the concern there. I feel like we'd be remiss as a body to not mention every meeting, the housing crisis, the potential, honestly, lost generation of people that get to live here. And a lot of this, while Richmond 300 was great, award winning, it was in an environment that is even removed from today's reality. So I think we need to be a little more elastic, personally, in terms of how we apply Richmond 300, given the harsh realities we're currently experiencing.
Well, I can address that. I think the way you do it is fill apart. I think the way you do it is what you guys talk about mapping. It's where you put it, right? There are areas where more density, because it's in proximity to existing density, that's where you put it. There are areas where there is none and there's historic pattern. Yes, there's more density, but you don't go 2 steps, you go 1. So I think that's the way I would deal with it.
So you would say 2 steps, 1 step in some places and 2 steps in others based on sort of existing context. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe that honestly, that's better than what is on the chart here.
This is Johannes. I was sort of surprised at the public meetings. Spoke to a couple of people from thinking Colonial Place and Malvern Gardens, which is one of our test cases here. And in terms of that, I was kind of a little concerned about how we deal with higher density on some of these streets here. And notice that the Patterson Avenue is considered a priority transit route. So that automatically falls back into the idea of higher density on transit routes. And then the other one was Grove Avenue, because we've seen a lot of development on Grove Avenue and there's been some change there. And after speaking with some of the neighbors, they had mentioned both Patterson and also as Grove Avenue as places where they could see the upzoning happening. So I think that this test study here shows a pretty good idea of if we just do that microcosm, that is a nice concept doing the upzoning through there. And then the rest in terms of the RDB, I think I'd have to go back and study this, what we're doing, but adding the opportunity for a couple of extra units in the back is still a pretty solid idea for that area. So that's my perception, and that's my perception after communicating more so with a couple of public meetings that we went through. Meaning we've had to come through the entire city and go through each block and see what we think, but that's okay.
So Renee, Colin, I know that this is great conversation and it's needed and it's not I don't want to rush you guys, but we have 15 minutes before we move to the next presentation. So
I think we may actually not need 15 minutes for that final presentation. Basically, what we're going to be doing is just kind of taking you through how to read the uses. We don't necessarily have to have a discussion, and then we're going to let you take that away, and then we'll next meeting we'll be able to discuss it in more detail. I prefer that we keep this conversation going, and I suspect that people does as well based on the amount of questions that we're bringing up. I just want you guys to be mindful of the timing. So if there is something really important we need to get to in the second presentation, just keep an eye on that time. Yeah, I don't think we're going to need more than 15 minutes for that final part of the presentation. So I would prefer to keep this going if we can. Yes, I agree. Thank you.
Renee,
Okay.
This is Preston Lloyd. Marion, can we go back to slide 10, please? I just have a question that's more in line with clarification as I was reading this slide.
Yeah.
I noticed there were a number of places where institutional uses were designated in blue with their own designation. And right now, the zoning ordinance allows, for instance, churches, places of worship as a by right use in residential districts.
Yeah.
So the zoning is actually residential, even though that institutional use may be part of the fabric of that neighborhood. And yet, if we're zooming out, looking at where are the places where there's the greatest amount of opportunity for mixing of uses, places of worship, churches, and similar, oftentimes have surplus land that could be deployed for residential density. And so, again, this may just be recognizing current use, but if we're going to create a separate district and churches, for instance, are going to be zoned in that separate district, I would not want a situation where any church would automatically have to go through a rezoning process in order to be eligible for residential uses. There's obviously some other state and federal legal implications of that, but without going into that piece, I would urge you to maybe consider whether zoning consistently residential within a residential neighborhood and then allowing places of worship as a permitted use rather than creating their own zoning district.
And Renee, before you respond, you can type his, Director Bonk has a follow-up comment.
Yeah, so, it's Kevin Bach,
Come forward so that.
yeah. So I think we've talked about this in terms of just, right, the ability for churches, places of worship that are large landowners, their ability to supply housing, whether they do it now or do it in the future, that has been part of the discussion. I think one of the things that we have talked about, traditionally, we have allowed churches and places of worship, civic uses, as by right uses in residential areas. Times are changing. I think one of the things that has maybe drawn some concern is that those uses, especially on potentially large tracts of land, can be very impactful to neighborhoods in terms of traffic generation and other, I'll say, like just health, safety, welfare impacts that there could be, I'll say, out of sync with like a quieter character of a residential neighborhood. So with that, I think for especially larger tracts of land, we're looking at potentially having an institutional zoning, but in the institutional zoning, having perhaps residential be part of that. And that you might be able to use, because I would say, and this is, we've been through this exercise, just even like if you look at like traffic impacts, right? In terms of places of assembly have really big impacts. Schools is another example, right? At like certain times of day. Whereas residential has much lower impact in terms of trip generation and traffic and things like that. So I think I think what I'm going with this is we're trying to identify, I think that this helps with the neighborhood, is like, what is potentially the most like impactful thing that could be there? And in this case, it would be maybe that school or civic use or church, but then you would allow like lesser uses within it, like residential. So I think that's what we're trying to do is like, what's the max that you could get there? So I think, again, Marianne, I think that's one of the things we've talked about in terms of when we get to the use tables, if that would be allowed in.
Yeah, so if it's okay, I think I would like to maybe just park this discussion for next time because we're going to be explicitly talking about this when we get into uses at the next meeting. If that's okay. But just for your information, what we're showing now is we are introducing an institutional zone, which is for institutions of beyond a certain size. So you still will be able to build your tiny chapels or storefront churches or whatever within your residential district, but when you go beyond a certain size, it would get its own category. On the topic still of upzoning along major streets, I guess a couple of other specific questions here to ask you. Just trying to feel out the rationale for how far we upzone and where. Are there any properties along some major streets that you think shouldn't be upzoned at all beyond the kind of bit of upzoning that's already happening with the new districts that we're developing? That's a question for you. And then second, the middle question here was, we've kind of put the upzonings on sort of a spectrum that goes up to RDC, which is small lots detached, and then going beyond that to RDA, which is attached or small multi-unit. Just wondering if there's some situations where it would be better to be allowed to go up to a small multi-unit building than to be allowed to do lots of small detached units on separate lots. And again, I'm thinking about again about the Carey Street thing, and maybe this is not the best example there, but you do have some big old apartments there, like in other parts of Carey Street, with big open spaces around them. Is that more in character if you have like a big building like that, then you divide it up into a whole lot of tiny lots each with the house on it? I'm not sure if you understand where I'm going, but just wondering if it it maybe is less disruptive to actually go further in some cases.
No, you're good. Well, this fell apart. I'm struggling to think where on Cary, maybe down along Malvern, there's some multifamily, and then there's one old 1930s apartment house at the corner of Three Chopped and Cary, but there's no multifamily in between. But I suppose my reaction to it, without thinking a lot about it, is if you've already got multifamily, like you do around Cary and Malvern, and you know, then that would probably make sense to continue that pattern of multifamily. And Richmond 300 does call for small units of, I forget what it is, 4 to 6 or something in these areas. I suppose, obviously, I'm an advocate of consistency and incrementalism, but that you know, if you've already got apartments and you're going to put more density than apartments, maybe more apartments make sense.
This is Preston. Can I jump in on that and just offer an example? And it's a matter of public record because it's a pending application. This is close to VUU, Virginia Union on Chamberlain. And there have been a number of properties very, very close to the university that have been developed as higher density multifamily, and they are very clearly on a major street. And so I'd say that's consistent with sort of the character, and you've got an institutional use right there. It's highly walkable. I think, you know, it's pretty much dead on consistent with the Richmond 300 plan. You go one block north on Chamberlain, and you're still on a major street. And the most you can get on that major street is 4 to 10 units of multifamily. And so I would say that we whiffed on that in the master plan because there's an application pending that would be consistent with that existing density. It would look exactly like the existing apartments that have been built. And it's not consistent with the Richmond 300, the technical, you know, we really read what that future land use designation is. And so, you know, that's where I think it goes to the point, you know, along these major streets, there does have to be that flexibility to provide density. And that's the place where you want it. And if we're going to limit it to the 4 to 6 or 6 to 10 or whatever the number is, I think we're perhaps missing an opportunity in some of those areas that are primed for that redevelopment. Chamberlain, certainly, I would wager is one of those.
That makes sense to me, but just continuing with, I mean, you brought up Cary Street, and Charlie's right, there's R1 there. If you look at your Cary Street map, there are large pieces of RDC there sort of to the left that, back to what I started this meeting with, 1 unit to 12 units could be built theoretically all along there. So if you want feedback of where this plan goes too far, in my opinion, that's where it goes too far.
Yeah, understood.
Slightly different topic, mentioning perhaps in lieu of more dense residential housing, offering up as an alternative. Oh, well, you can do like a multi-family thing. Also in an environment where building materials are only getting more expensive. Assuming that people will rush to do a commercial building instead of more efficient buildable townhomes. Probably isn't a fair assumption. And I would just heed some caution there that that might not produce the actual results as intended. By that, I understand the intention, but I just don't know if that would produce what we think it would.
Good point.
So yeah, I'm just making a list in my head of like factors, you know, to take into consideration for the upzoning. So there's sort of existing, just the kind of existing context. There's what it's currently zoned today. There's proximity to transit. There's proximity to other, you know, things like major institutions. Not sure if there's anything else that we should add to that list.
I guess.
Other comments from the questions? I know we've talked a lot about residential areas around, and still is being built around Cary Street, but there are certain other areas of the city that have this zoning. That are equally
city above the
acted.
western part of the city.
Yeah, so you're seeing, you know, through part of Oak Grove here, there's a strip that's being upzoned to RDC, or sorry, RAC.
Like, so many pages. What's, RAC isn't, this is Maritza, RAC isn't on the little chart on page 9. Can you remind me what that would be?
So it's on the chart as an option. So actually, I'm not sure. Sorry, it should be RAB is what it's getting upzoned to, unless there's already some permission there for something higher. RAB would be allowing up to other attached buildings or small apartments of up to 6 units. That would be kind of the furthest you would go on the basis of upzoning along a major street, unless there's already some permission there in place that would suggest we go further.
I mean, I'm wondering, like, on a unit, because right now, so that part of Oak Grove, is it R5?
A lot of it is.
Yeah, I think that's R5.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like right now it's 50 feet. You could take 2, so you can have 6. You could essentially take a lot there if it's 50 feet wide already. You could divide it in 2 and put 6 units, which is sort of almost the same as RAB. Just the difference would be the character. And I would
Yeah.
almost say that the character of that neighborhood isn't necessarily, I mean, is it like front to back units like we saw in the previous one? Like, I don't really feel like it is. I'm just kind of talking out loud. So, I mean, I feel like getting from R5 to RDC itself is already a pretty big jump.
Well, keep in mind that a lot of this area is non-conforming, so it actually is narrower than 50 feet right now.
Yeah.
If it was all conforming, we probably would go RDB instead of RDC.
Yeah. And I don't know if like that road, when is that? Dinwiddie, like, I'm not sure if there was a road, if that's the right one. I mean, I recognize that that's what it was on the master plan, but maybe that's why we have an entire public process for the zoning ordinance. We can talk about these things.
That's right. So yeah, so maybe that doesn't get, maybe it gets only upzone 1 run to, which would be RAA. So you could do attached there, but not multi-unit.
Yeah.
Like multifamily. I'm not sure. Again, it's just about trying to make like a sort of, rational, kind of consistent approach across the city about, what factors we take into consideration.
This is Johannes, talking about that area and talking about Blackwell down into Oak Grove. Seems to me that this would be a great area to be able to upzone it and be able to put more investment into the area. It's sort of an underserved area as far as my perception of it. And the scale of the homes are relatively small. And if there's an opportunity to bring more population in, that'd be great. Plus, it's adjacent to the Richmond Highway, which is a primary transit corridor for the future. So I think we should be looking at trying to, and it's also almost immediately adjacent towards the old Manchester area. So it's getting really close to the central city areas. So this area could really use some infusion in my perspective, and by giving it the opportunity to upzone it a little bit more is a positive factor.
Charlie Wilson, it's your district, yeah, part of your district.
Oh, no, right. Hopefully I'm interested beyond just my district, but Ellen Robertson, so for this area, it is predominantly smaller houses, residential, some multifamily on some of the main streetways, certainly not Route 1, which I think higher density there would be absolutely the way to go, even much higher than where we are at the present time. But for a residential community like this, I think, a scale up, one scale, and maybe some designated corner lots or something like that, maybe scale up to, but certainly anything greater than that, I think would be need for development, but it would completely reprogram the character of the community.
Charlie Wilson, building off of that, totally understand that. I think the proposition of allowing for units in the rear can calm some of the nerve of neighborhoods that are concerned with how the fabric feels to the person walking down the street. It would be, I'm imagining someone who's interested in buying a property and adding density to it and selling it or renting it, whatever. If the house is already there and the house is fine and they can make more money doing more in the rear, and that's a sensitive way of doing it. I don't know if like from a codification standpoint, this is going to fully get there, but if it gets close to that, that might be a way of kind of threading the needle of getting that density while also being sensitive to the environment that presently exists.
Yeah, again, keep in mind that we're allowing 2 units plus an ADU per lot, right, at the moment. So you could, if we just apply RDC to these areas, you could already build, 1 or even 2 units in the back. And mostly there are alleyways here, so you could access them from the alleyway as well.
Philip Hart again. Councilwoman makes a great point, which is that some of the concerns that I've been raising are not specific to one part of town. When I've made my comments, they've been with regard to single family housing, which exists all over the city. One of our first meetings, we had a map showing the existing uses, and residential was 70% of the land in the city, and it was all over the city. So there are issues of changing residential character throughout the city. The second point I want to make is something Maritza said that I thought about, but I hadn't mentioned it. To me, there's little difference between RDC and some of the attached category. Yeah, they may be 3 feet apart or 6 feet apart or something like that, but it's going to feel like very similar to an attached kind of configuration is my concern. So I'll just throw that out there. I don't see much difference between because RDC is so dense with just 25 feet of width, and then with duplexes and all the rest, it's going to feel like a townhouse attached kind of environment, I think.
Ellen Robertson again. I think also with some of the residential areas, especially in certain section of the city, that we have very, very, very limited infrastructure. And when we talk about zoning upgrading, that may not be directly, but we must take that in consideration because the infrastructure in some of these annex community areas lack infrastructure for upgrading zoning. And so I think it's important that we, at least if we do zoning upgrades above 1 to 2 at the highest, I think we really are going to be presenting ourselves with a major challenge for being able to do that scale of development without the infrastructure.
So just to ask, what kind of infrastructure are you most concerned about? Like sewage and water, or transportation,
Sewage,
or
water,
schools?
Utilities. Schools are probably pretty good. We've done better with recreational parks and recreations to some degree, but public transit maybe, but certainly sewage, water, drainage, lighting, sidewalks, curb and gutter, all of that is just non-existent.
Ms. Robertson, can I chime in on that comment? This is Preston Lloyd. Renee, it's been my experience that if you're looking for the largest tracts of undeveloped land in the city, it's largely concentrated in areas that, to Ms. Robertson's point, were annexed from Chesterfield. The streets that are not the primary streets are served by ditches on either side where there are no sidewalks. There are 2 lanes. The schools are overcrowded because that's where the growing population of folks who have relocated to the city, sometimes from particular communities, have located in our crowding schools, which is a challenge from an infrastructure standpoint. And yet that's where the land is. And so there's this dichotomy of this difficult policy whipsaw that the city is experiencing, where that's where the land is, that's where the housing can go, but you don't have the infrastructure that supports it. And so which do you do first? Do you invest the money in the hopes that it'll then be developed as housing? Do you put in the housing and hope that that gives you the density that you need to put in the transit, to add the bus lines, to do the things that allow that to be served? And that, of course, is a decision for council to make and not for this body. But it would be my personal recommendation that this document allow for the density to occur, and then for city council to work in a thoughtful and strategic way in trying to figure out how to prioritize the infrastructure investments that will support the housing that we know.
And Ellen Robertson. I appreciate the fact that, you know, whatever cross we have to carry, we can always bring it to city council. But I will assure you that our shoulders are not as broad as you think that they are. And they're no broader than what the taxpayer is willing to pay for, okay? So, but I do think that when we think about that kind of zoning, because if we upzone above that 1, 2 levels, when there isn't infrastructure, we're going to be right back into a challenge. If by right, by zoning, you can do it without the infrastructure. And so I realize that this zoning doesn't address the installation for infrastructure. I appreciate that. But it certainly is something we need to weigh when we start thinking about the zoning. And the chicken and the egg, I don't think we've ever resolved that as to what comes first.
Charlie Wilson, building off of that, I will say, even if it is by right, when you go to get your permits, one of the things you have to do is get your WSC, like utility connection permit. You as the developer are responsible, paying a tap fee, be pretty sizable sometimes. Presumably that money goes into some operating budget for DBU. I'm not an expert in what happens after you pay the money, but I feel like there's money available through that could be looked at to cover that. And then just the same, if we're worried about stormwater runoff or things like that, you're required to, through land disturbance permits, answer for your discharge delta from what previously exists. And so I feel like there are some things that you can accomplish through permitting that are going to happen anyway. But to your point, things like sidewalk, curb, and gutter, that can happen under the subdivision ordinance. I totally get what you're saying. There are some things that can be helped and some things that can't.
So if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind moving on to the last 2 discussion topics. And we've got really limited time. I think those 2 were much less controversial. I just want to touch on them if we can. And I don't think I need more than 10 minutes for the presentation. So I think we'll be okay. Rear transitions was the next one. And I just want to kind of just put the question back to you again. Assuming there's going to be some sort of rear transition standard, which we're going to get to in the next module that we present, and we'll have a chance to discuss, you know, the details of that with you later on. Assuming there's some rear transition standard between buildings at different heights, is there just a maximum height that you just don't want to see surpassed beside a 3-story residential district that you just feel like we just shouldn't go there? There should be some stepping before you get there. Question for the group. So when you saw those maps with heights, was there anything you just thought it's too much, too jarring?
This is Brian White. There's nothing like that really, but and I don't know if this is the right forum for this concern, but I've got it, which is as we upzone, which I think we need to, and it's important. The city assessor has traditionally taken the position that the value of the land is based on the most you can build on it. And if we've got existing single-family homes or small-scale buildings on there, and you're now allowed to do something much more substantial, is it going to be taxed in such a way that most necessitates somebody to tear down what's there and build something huge?
Maybe that's a question for staff. I don't know if I can answer that.
I'm sorry?
I said maybe that's a question for staff. I don't know if I can answer that question.
So my question was in regards to his Alan Robertson. Is it based on zoning, the maximum?
Highest and
zone
best use of the
Based on
land.
zoning?
Mhm.
Okay.
Additional feedback?
That may be a question we have to continue to have, or we reach out to the lawyers about that. I'm not sure.
This is Kevin. I think we're gonna have a separate discussion on that, but I think it is important because it weaves to a few things. One, in terms of, right, the cost of the land, I think, as we talk, and we'll probably come back around to some market studies in terms of, right, just because you allow it, does that mean it will happen, or to what degree it will happen? I also think it has to do, which is like beyond our scope, back to council in terms of like taxation policy. But then I think the other piece to consider is when we talk about application of old historic districts, what it means for those as well. So I do hear in terms of, I think part of the discussion is going to be, yep, in terms of allowing for incremental growth, but not putting things in such a place that it, like, right, the only solution is basically to tear down and do something else. I think that warrants its own separate discussion. But I think that's important to bring up today, so we have it scheduled for a future meeting.
Okay.
Alan Robertson, I want to ask a crazy question, I guess.
Yes.
We did the master plan. One of the challenges that I felt like we could have addressed is what growth rate does the city want to get to? I mean, how many hundreds of thousand people do we want to live in the city? When we think of zoning and we think of upzoning and doing all of these great things, are we doing that with any mindset of projection of growth that we would like to see happen, and that the zoning is done in a manner that prepare us to get to a certain level of growth that we want to reach? That a principle that we're considering.
I think I might call Director Von Project. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, so two facets. One, yes, it's being considered. I would not say there's a target growth rate that we're seeking to achieve in terms of, I think what we're trying to understand is what is the population growth rate for our metro area, right? People are moving to this metro area, they're moving to this economy. And when they do so, what is the availability of housing units that demand? What's our supply that we're offering in terms of the demand that is coming here, right? So our economy, like, thankfully, we're in a spot where we're growing. People are moving here. They're putting extra demand on our housing supply, right? We offer it. Our surrounding counties are offering housing supply, but also understanding, right, because of our landlocked status, if there's more people who want to be in the city proper, then we have housing units available. Trying to better understand, and I think this is part of the work with RKG, the economists that we have, is like, okay, as those people come, how many are desiring to be in the city proper? And with that, by what degree, by allowing certain changes, can that supply come? And I think, the thing I always keep coming back to, like, this zoning ordinance is enabling. It does not force anybody to do anything with their property, right? Like, it does not, like, your zoning changes, you don't have to do anything differently with your property in terms of maximizing on that capacity. So it's trying to understand, okay, as that population comes, as that demand comes, and then really in terms of housing units, what is that allocation of people who want to be in the city, and to what degree should we allow for that housing? And then also, again, the spatial aspect, where are people in the city itself, right? And in terms of like the little submarkets coming in terms of having that demand, because there's some areas of the city where we could allow like everything, right? Huge 12-story apartment buildings, but like there is no market demand for it. So like that will not materialize. So as we start to go through, and I'm going to land this plane here, as we start to do the mapping, is bringing back in RKG to work on some of that assessment, because I think we are clear, like right now, we don't have enough supply to keep up with the demand because we've seen the prices escalate so dramatically, right? Over and above any type of like normal inflation numbers. So obviously there's a need for more supply. It's part of the zoning exercises to help determine like where is that supply, where are we going to allow for that supply? So I think part of that will be, all right, this could potentially allow for this many housing units without necessarily, I will say, like zoning is not going to drive population growth. It's going to help respond to where that population ends up in the city. That answer your question? No. Again, maybe we can have a separate one, I think, on this in terms of, I think.
And I'll tell you what
Yeah.
so, and I agree with, I appreciate and agree with what you're saying, Ellen Robertson. But I'll go back years when we said we're gonna annex. We didn't annex land, we annexed the goal of a certain number of people that we wanted to see in the city of Richmond. If we talk about, so that's the reason, part of the reason is what is the population growth maximum that we are striving to achieve in the city of Richmond? I mean, can Richmond be 400,000 citizens? I mean, residents or population? Could we possibly do that?
Straight up.
Even if
Yeah.
the zoning, I mean, with the zoning,
I think, yes, the city could be that population, even with the zoning in place you have right now. And I think, part of it, I'll go back to looking at like some of the master plan, right? They looked at different growth scenarios. I think we're probably on more of the aggressive trajectory. And again, I think in terms of, because that is happening, it behooves us to look at, facilitating where can we provide those housing units to house those people. And this is like exactly what this conversation is for, in terms of like, I think it's both in terms of, I will say gentle density in some of our neighborhoods by adding another unit or two. And then it's also like increased density in some of our major nodes and our major corridors. It's not either or, I think it's both. And part of that goes back to some of the infrastructure discussions that we're having. But I think I'll put on the shelf, I think it's another like topic for discussion as we start to, I think, map and working with RKG again, is trying to understand like what may happen in particular areas in terms of, allowing for that growth to happen in particular areas and understanding where that is and what the impacts may be, especially also when it comes to infrastructure that's available or not available.
On that topic, I think my memory's serving me reasonably well, but these days I'm not sure. I think if we look back historically, if we look back historically, I think about 1950, we had about 250,000 people before any annexation at all. So when we think about where we're going in terms of population, maybe, I don't know if we annex another 30 or 40% of land in the city. But in terms of where our population is, we really lost a lot of people.
Okay.
And as we go, and then if you look at the population growth in the region, I think from the 50s up through the 80s, I think we were running at about 15 to 17% per decade, which is sort of a nice, happy, moderate rate, but certainly nowhere near the Washington, D.C.s or the Raleighs or the Las Vegas type of places. I'm not so sure that we're really growing that much faster at this point. Of course, we've got more people, but I think we obviously ran into the lulls of, the pandemic and other issues when people were moving around. And as such, I think that if we're thinking about population, certainly if we had 250,000 people here in 1950, we've annexed all this land. 400 doesn't seem like a big trek at all.
There were.
So I don't, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you guys, but we need to kind of keep moving on with the last bit of the presentation, and we're running out on time.
Yeah, I'd like to, Philip Hart, I'd like to give you some quick feedback on these two questions.
Okay.
On the first one, yes, I think a height restriction is appropriate. I'm thinking of a recent development near where I live. The houses are 2,000 square foot houses, small house, small-ish houses. And they put a 4-story, $1 million per unit building right up to the lot line, put a mansard roof on the top, which makes it look even bigger. And it's just jarring, okay? I think that was a real miss. So I don't know what the right transition would be. I could make something up. It's 2 stories, go to 4 stories, something like that. But I think that there should be a step up in these areas. So we don't have that jarring effect. Secondly, that second one there, MX3 in the master plan, MX3 applies to a number of areas. And it also applies to the West Hampton node, where Richmond 300 calls for a 3-story maximum. MX4, as you can tell by the name, is 4 stories. So this was one of the comments that I made on the survey. Yes, I think there needs to be an MX3 category to meet Richmond 300 with regard to that node, and it may be appropriate and probably is in other areas too. And it's actually, it dovetails with your first question. It's a way of transitioning heights if you have something less than going from 1 to 4 stories, 20 feet apart. So,
great, thank you.
Comment to that also. I'm not quite as concerned about the 3 to 4 story differences personally, but I noticed in your when you delineated the high density areas versus the next level down, it looked like you had a lot of step down areas in the really dense areas, let's say along the Broad Street corridor, and maybe up and down some of the other major corridors. So I think that looked pretty successful in doing that. There might be some areas where we would have a tall building, and when I say tall building, not 4, I'm talking about 8, 10, 12 stories, and there might be some consideration then in terms of an inclined plane if it's really close to a, let's say, historic district or something like that.
Okay, so
Okay,
I'm gonna stop the
yeah,
comments.
let's go ahead.
Through this, but I'm hearing some things that we do need to follow up with staff on, particularly around highest investigated assessments, some of our growth and population projections and how that's all tying together. And for finals are in their public facilities. So Renee, I looked ahead. I see you still have a couple of things, but we also have Collins. So I'm going to let you two decide how you want to use your last 9 minutes strategically.
Yeah, so I think let's just scroll ahead in the presentation right now, and I'll try and focus on presenting the use stuff. There was a final question, which was really about the use of the CG district, but we can touch on that next time again. I think that was maybe less controversial. So in terms of what you have in front of you for your use package, so you should have all this in front of you. So we can talk through just how to read that, and then we're going to leave you with a few questions to think about, and we'll address this in the next meeting. So the main topic of our next meeting will be to go through the use issues. So in some ways, this is a bit easier to understand, I think, than some of the form stuff. This is the outline for what's in the document. Next slide. This is kind of the key feature here. So this is the draft allowed use table. So we'll talk to you about what's in that. Next slide. One of the things that's going to happen at this is we're going to be eliminating pyramidal zoning or cascading zoning, which is one of the things you have in your code right now, where it says whatever is allowed in district X may be allowed in district Y, and you have to flip back to district X. Just as a kind of organizational thing, it's difficult to read that. So we're basically making a bit of a simpler system where it explains in each district when you flip to it, what you can do there. And it's all outlined in that chart. Next page. Next page. So the draft allowed use table. So what you see here with all the P's and C's, this is what's allowed in each one of these districts. So down the left-hand side here, the uses, and then in this part of the chart, what's allowed. So the P, meaning permitted, is allowed. The C, meaning conditional, is allowed with some conditions. So you have to come and essentially apply for it and explain that you're meeting those conditions. Where there's an asterisk, there's additional standards that have to be met. and we outline what those standards are. So might be about the size of that use, might be about something else. And where there's a dash, it means not allowed, so not permitted there. Next slide. Those are the districts across the top that we've been drafting. So those align to the districts in your package. The use categories are all down the left-hand side there, and they're grouped into headings. And you can see which ones are being called out where there's a use standard. So whether there's a particular use standard that applies or a definition that explains what's there, you can flip to it later on in your document. Next slide. So use definition. So obviously for each one of these, it could be open to interpretation. We have a definition that would appear in the back of the document that defines each one of these uses. So both the category and the individual uses within it. Next slide. And there's also rules for interpretation. So if something seems like it's a gray area, if it seems like it's in between, if it wasn't quite contemplated, there's rules here for how you determine whether it's allowed or not. And then the additional standards that will apply. So whenever you see the asterisk, there's some additional standards that would be referenced out later in the document. Next slide. So here's just some screenshots of the specific use standards. So again, just going through each one of those, when there's a special standard, it could be about size, it could be about where it's located in the building, it could be about something else that just restricts when it's allowed, not allowed. Next slide. And then the accessory uses. So when you have a use that's not the main use in a development or a building, but it's secondary to it. Obviously, accessory dwelling unit is maybe the most obvious one, but lots of other examples here as well. Those are laid out at the bottom of the table. And there's also an approach to how you interpret accessory uses that are maybe not listed here. Next slide. So that's just the overview of what you see there. Again, I think it's a bit more straightforward than some of the form stuff, but we'll be happy to answer questions about it in the last few minutes. These are just a set of questions for you guys. So I'm not going to read through all of these. We're going to go through them in detail over the next meeting. But they're just some questions that we had when we were putting together the table with staff. Some questions that seem like they weren't resolved yet. That might be controversial or might be worth going out to you guys and specifically raising. So we're going to have, again, a full discussion next time going through these and potentially some other questions as well. And also happy to answer anything that you guys may have. So at the moment, just any kind of just put out to you guys any kind of questions just of interpretation or explanation, anything you don't understand in terms of what I just said. And Colin, feel free to jump in if you want to add anything else.
I would just encourage, go ahead, Colin. I'm sorry. I saw you come off mute.
Go ahead.
This is Elizabeth Greenfield. I was just gonna encourage members of the council to, between now and the next meeting, I know you're giving us some discussion questions for us to think of, but things come up that we didn't get to today because we went through some really important material. Please make sure you send those over to Mary Ann so we can get questions answered or maybe prep the consultants for additional discussion points for our May meeting. Because I know that we're running at the end of time and we're going through this last bit a little quickly. But did anyone have any questions on the use provisions and how to read them? Anything while we have Colin and Renee still with us?
This is Wayne Plato. Those discussion questions, are they in this document right here?
Sorry.
You have a copy of the presentation?
The
larger presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, so this will be in the presentation, which you should be able to get a copy of. But yeah, what you have in front of you is the draft document.
Yeah, I have one quick one. It would be helpful if we had material that showed what changes are really being proposed by these. I mean, we can read them and understand what C and P permits, but I have no idea when I look at these accessory uses and businesses and homes. I have no idea what the current rules are. So how much of a change is being proposed? That would be helpful if we
Bill,
could
can I-
get that
Can
information.
I take a stab at this as a
Yeah.
frequent flyer in the current ordinance? The answer is this is a complete overhaul.
Mhm.
It would be like if I took my bicycle into a car manufacturer and was like, what's the difference between this Lamborghini and my bicycle? It's totally.
Okay,
different.
just assume it's a complete change up. Okay.
Yeah, there's no chart in the current.
Yeah, it would be difficult to make a chart like that. I mean, I think that we could maybe come back with a little bit of examples for you, like in some cases where, R1 is, mostly being, transferred into RDA or something like that, what would, how those would compare against each other. So we can maybe present some of that next time, but it will be not perfect.
Okay.
And I'm gonna throw this out and maybe, Marianne will throw something at me later, but, I would maybe suggest we poll the group and see who's available for adding, even if it's just extra 30 minutes to our meeting time, because I feel we're really getting into the weeds here and having really good conversation, and, I feel we're a little rushed, and we leave here with every meeting with more stuff we want staff to bring to us. So I know time is valuable, but maybe a quick poll to see who's willing to just add in a little bit more time so that we're not rushing the discussion. All right, and I like to be prompt and keep on schedule, so we're right at 6 o'clock. So we're gonna stop here, and I'm just gonna remind everyone that our next meeting is May 15th. Excuse me, May 14th at 4 p.m. in this room, the 5th floor conference room at City Hall. And as Marianne stated earlier, the working group public interest form is still available online until April 13th on the Third Refresh website. So if you want to sign up to be on a working group and get more technical and in the weeds, there's still time. With that, unless there's no pressing issues, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Dave, you have that building.
Thank you.
You have that building.
Yeah.
Which I've been in those units out.
Yeah.
They are beautiful. But it's just.
I'll be at the Cardinals.